It is starting. And we're live. So for anyone just joining us or tuning in to watch the recording later, welcome to Romancing the Capital, the online romancing convention right now. I am the moderator for today. I'm Jessica Ripley. I also write under Renee Hewitt. And I will let our lovely authors introduce themselves, starting with Desiree.
Hi, I'm Desiree Holt, and I love writing about military, former and current military. They're like my heroes. I have a lot of resources that I'm very, very lucky to have. Currently, my best resource is a former SEAL named Jack Carr, who himself just hit the New York Times bestseller list. Yay, Jack, who writes great books and is so patient with me. So anything you read about SEALs in my book, for the most part, is authentic because he answers everything for me.
And let's go to Zoe.
Hey, everybody. I'm Zoe York. I write military romance. I write both Navy SEAL romance, like Desiree does, and I also write Canadian military romance because my husband's in the military here in Canada. So, like Desiree, I have an expert I can turn to and ask questions. And I like writing both of those. I also write some romantic suspense as Ainsley Booth.
Awesome.
And
Amy.
I have read Zoe's entire Pine Harbor series, and I love it. So if you haven't read it yet, one-click it today.
I guess it's my turn. I'm Amy Ruttan, and I write romantic suspense in Desiree's World, so a lot of military heroes in that. And I also write medical romance, so we have doctors, paramedics, first responders. That currently the book that I'm working on right now that's due on revisions are due Wednesday is the first responder mountain rescue in Jasper, Alberta. So I like writing about heroes in uniform.
Awesome. And I wanted to transition that because I don't want to just talk about military, because I want to know, do you have any other heroes in uniform, and what would you define as a hero in uniform? Because I know personally, especially now with what we're going through, like Amy, for example, I would say your doctors are heroes in uniform right now.
Yeah.
So start with Amy. Let me know what you consider a hero in uniform, not just military, and what you've written.
Well, I've right doctors and the paramedics and first responders right now, and the military. What I consider a hero, really, honestly, is anyone that serves their community and puts people first. Right now, I have a lot of friends that aren't necessarily nurses or doctors, but are on the front lines of healthcare, like janitors, respiratory therapists, people that are in the hospital. I have friends that were working in as receptionists to doctors that are now doing the door screens at the hospital, and they're putting their lives at risk. I'm going to say grocery workers. I was a grocery worker. I worked my way through college working on the tills, and it's a very dirty job, like with the food coming through and stuff, and people giving you money that's dirty. So I would say, like, right now, there's so many people that are really putting their lives at risk, and people aren't really thinking of them as heroes, but to me, they are. They really are.
I have another source who is non-military, although he was in the military before, but he's deputy with the local sheriff's department. And I think he's as much into these books as I am, because he would spend every hour talking to me about this. But he's really good because he has all this experience and he can tell me how to do different things. I had a car kidnap scene. It's kidnap scenes from a car in one book. Remember, I talked about it, and I couldn't figure out. We were in my living room, and I couldn't figure out how this was going to happen. So we went down to the 7-Eleven, and he went in and he showed his badge to the guy behind the counter and said, "Just don't pay any attention to us for a few minutes." And we acted out the whole scene. and it was a lot of fun, and what he does gives me new insight into what the cops are actually doing on a day-to-day basis. And his fiance is a nurse who works with first responders. So, yeah, I got them all scattered through my books.
Awesome. Zoe.
Yeah, so I also write other heroes and heroines in uniform. In the Pine Harbor series, I have a number of paramedics, both male and female paramedics. In book 2 and book 7, in the first series, they're paramedics. And then in this, I'm doing a spin-off series, The Kincaids of Pine Harbor, that'll launch in June. And in that first book, the hero is a paramedic and a firefighter, and the heroine is a midwife. I really like people that I like first responders. I like to write a lot of medical professionals too, just like Amy does. I think that there's something really compelling about those characters that, they're genuinely heroic, right? And that's what we love about romance, is that people doing good things for good reasons.
Yeah, exactly. So then the next thing I want to know is, just for you personally, what do you find that you often write more or prefer writing? Do you prefer having one person in uniform with, say, a civilian, or do you prefer a uniform with a uniform, like in the same branch or the same police, or say like a police officer and a paramedic? How do you tend to do it? Zoe, let's start with you.
Yeah, so I've written both of those. I think there are pros and cons to both. Like, for example, I wrote this book called Fall Quiet. It's book 9 in my Seals Undone series. And the hero is a SEAL, and the heroine is an Army sergeant. And I'm always torn between the realism of that's a very hard dynamic to write and be believable if they both stay in the forces. But it works because she's separate from him, not because of the relationship, but separate from him. She's getting out of the Army. So it starts with the meet cute where they're both in uniform, and then when they meet again, she's already made the decision to get out. But I think that there's something really like relatable where when they're both in uniform, the same uniform or different uniforms, they get each other on a different level, and they can share secrets and have like those really deep confessional moments that I think can be really powerful.
Yeah. How about you, Desiree?
Yeah, I like to have more than one in my book. I don't in all of them, but in a lot of them I do, because I think it shows how the different professions interact. And sometimes a person changes just by being connected with another person that's in uniform, like a paramedic and a cop, or a doctor and a police lieutenant or detective or whatever. So yeah, I like to mix it up because I think they each bring a different point of view to it.
Awesome. How about Amy?
So for medical romance, the key it's category romance for Harlequin, so they do have their key tropes that you have to have to write for a series line. And one of the key things about Harlequin Medical is you have to have them working together. So it doesn't matter if one's a doctor and one's a paramedic, or one's a doctor or a firefighter or a nurse or paramedic. That doesn't matter. But both of them have to be in a medical profession, because the dynamic of category romance, I could go on forever. The dynamic of category medical romance is they have to be interacting in the workplace. And that's how their romance blooms, because they're, doing the same job, they're feeling the same thing, they're connected that way. So a lot of the time, there is some kind of first responder medical prevention, and sometimes they switch power roles. They often write the heroine as the boss of the hero. Often. So I like that dynamic of a more in charge woman than a guy.
I like that too. So we have a question from the readers in the chat. Kimmy wants to know which character was most challenging to write. So can you tell us maybe which uniform profession is hardest to write, as well as one of your characters and what books they're from? Let's start with Desiree.
Oh boy, I have to think about that. I think I think probably Mark Halloran. It was the first of my Phoenix agency, because it was the first time that I started writing, really getting into romantic suspense, and I chose to do a Delta Force hero, mostly because I was still living in Texas. I was getting my taking the class to renew my concealed carry permit, and my instructor was former Delta Force, and I thought, okay, so maybe he'll help me. He was really good. He spent a lot of time for 2 days talking to me about it, but I couldn't quite get the character right because I wasn't used to that much depth in it. Does that make sense to you? There were things that he told me, and also when you're basing a character on somebody else, you kind of, want to make sure that you get it right. So I think I worked the hardest on Mark Halloran's character, and it finally came together, but it wasn't easy, but I would do it again.
And I find that those are like always really memorable characters, so it's worth it. Oh, and we just had somebody in the audience say we're just make sure to mute ourselves when we're not talking so that the audio is fine. We had in the last panel we had a loop that went on for like 5 minutes. It was not something we want to repeat. But let's go to Zoe.
Yeah. So these two books. Can you see them? There we go. These two books, in my Pine Harbor series, these are the two books about paramedics, and I found them quite challenging to write because, in like a lot of what we write, a lot of the canon that we write is drawn also from like television and movies, and there aren't a lot of TV shows and movies made about Canadian paramedics, so that they required more research to like find that balance between getting it right and also making it universally accessible to, because I have a ton of American readers, and so I wanted the experience on the page to be recognizable to them, but also accurate for my Canadian readers. And so I found writing paramedics quite a challenge compared to like Navy SEALs, for example, and also the canon of other romance novels. Like I feel like when a reader picks up a SEAL book, they have a clear expectation and there's a shorthand there. When they pick up a book about a Canadian paramedic, I have to do a lot of the canon world building there in a way that doesn't interfere with the romance arc, right? Because that's like most important.
Yeah, that makes sense. How about Amy?
I'm going to say my first surgeon I wrote, which was the first book I sold for Harlequin Medicals. I submitted to Harlequin Medicals on something called a fast track, which got in front of editors really fast. And I'm going to say a lot of the medical authors are nurses or have some kind of medical profession or some kind of, not me. I wrote my first surgeon because I like Grey's Anatomy. So the television thing that Zoe was talking about. So I found him really hard because also, again, with the canon that Zoe was talking about with Harlequin, especially, there are reader expectations you have to follow. So not only did I have to do research, I had to create an alpha hero that wasn't a complete asshole, but wasn't too soft. Because so that went back a few times with the editor who bought me is like, oh, now he's too nice. Oh, now he's a jerk. So he was a huge learning curve. So that was Quinn Devlin from my first book, Safe in His Hands. And of course, I wrote a Canadian doctor because I hadn't read any Canadian doctors in Harlequin Medical. Because one of the first things they say when you're trying to write for Harlequin is read the line you're interested in. So it was mostly UK, American, or Australian medicine. So I thought I would write about a doctor up in Nunavut. So there was a lot of research involved, a big learning curve. But I'm trying to, again, make it universal for readers all over the world. But yet Yeah, it was a huge learning process. So Quinn Devlin was probably, yeah, I'm gonna say my hardest, which was my first.
Awesome. You've all kind of talked about how hard it is to get them right, and who you use as research. How do you have recommendations for anyone who wants to write a hero in uniform and isn't married to a military person? Where can they find people? Where can they approach people? Like, you don't just call up the hospital and say, "Hey, can I talk to a surgeon about this?" Let's start with Amy.
So uh, I found a few books online about medical procedures that are very one's called A Writer's Guide to Body Trauma. I think that's what it's called. And because I have to be accurate, but I can't be gross because I've written a few things where my editor's like, that's disgusting. That's too much information for me. So from that, I had to learn. I also actually found a something called the Great Courses on Audible, and I had an Audible subscription, and it was actually surgeons and pediatricians going through their rounds. So you sort of got into their head what they're thinking while they're doing their rounds. They're rounding, they're talking about different cases. So I found like that, and unfortunately, Grey's Anatomy was a huge deal, sort of trying to look at the character arcs and learning about characters. So because they're human after all. They're not just cold. They have emotions. I mean, like, you can watch videos online now. I was watching a video, that Markham, Ontario Hospital did of their ICU staff and the doctors having to make calls to patients about putting people on ventilators during this crisis, and it, like, gets you in the feels. They're, like, about to break down. So, yeah, and I've met a lot of nurses through my kids' school that are very helpful, but they're just trying to take the job, but also what would a human feel? Like, what would they feel like your life is in their hands, so.
Yeah, that's neat. How about you, Desiree?
Well, first of all, there's a ton of information that you can get online. I mean, if you Google SEALs, Delta Force, the Marines, any of them, there is a gazillion websites on there. The other thing I found before I actually made personal connections is if you call the public relations office at a base or at the headquarters or whatever, the public relations officer himself or herself may not have the time to talk to you, but they will put you in touch with somebody who can answer your questions because they too want you to get it right. And I have found that they are really very willing and forthcoming as their time permits to answer your questions. I mean, sometimes they'll just say, okay, here's my email, send me your questions, and I'll get to them within the next couple of weeks. Um, and they will also recommend websites for you to go to or books that you can read. There's great books that you can find if you're writing Delta Force. Earl Haney's book about the Delta Force has a wealth of information in it. So there's always places that you could look. And I use a lot of it for backup because I try not to pester my sources more than I have to. But yes, there's always, and if you want to type in a question about a specific thing, you'll find a lot of answers out there too. And then ask everybody you know if they know somebody that's in the military or the police.
That is good advice. I'm going to need to start doing that. How about Zoe?
Yeah, so I second a lot of what Desiree said and what Amy said as well. Like a bunch of random things. One, know what it is exactly you want to Google. Like, the more general your term, the more general your responses are going to be. For example, one search phrase that is really useful for me is on YouTube, a day in the life of an EMT supervisor, or a day in the life of a small town paramedic. Those phrases, you will all, I mean, YouTube's been around now for like 15 years, 12 years, something like that. And so there's so much content there. If you know exactly the search phrase that you're looking for, you will almost certainly find a video that's pretty close to what you're looking for. And then that will then spin off more specific questions. So those are two that I happen to have looked up recently. because I'm writing an EMT supervisor for the first time, and his day is different than the other paramedics that I've written before. The other thing, I really like Desiree's suggestion of reaching out to a PR department in a local emergency services department. What actually sparked my idea for Pine Harbor was there was a Mother's Day. We're coming up to Mother's Day, and so it would have been now 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 6 years ago maybe. There was a Mother's Day open house at the emergency services building not far from me, and they have done it annually ever since. And I bet that in your community, not right now, but like next year, there will be an open house. But both like reaching out to a local department or searching for an open house, both of them require a bit of patience and time because they're not necessarily going to happen like in the next week. So if you want to write about something or learn more about something that you don't know very much about, give yourself the time to learn in stages and in waves, and then try to save your questions for the experts until the end of the project when you really know very clearly what you need to get exactly right. Like in any book, in any romance novel, there are only a couple of scenes that need to be like really specifically right. You can Vaseline on the lens quite a bit. And so save your questions for the experts until the end of your project. That's my biggest, most specific piece of advice.
That's great advice. So we have a question from Ayanali, and she wants to know, can you each tell us about the craziest or a crazy situation you've written about with your uniformed heroes? Let's start with Zoe.
I don't know. Oh God, you've put me on the spot. Probably in my SEALs books, I find all of the SEAL training really extreme. I mean, their missions are also pretty extreme. Having like a lot of the, the halo jumps, high altitude, low open jumps where they, then land in water and then have to swim after that. Like that's all very intense. I don't know. That maybe is not the best answer, but I've written in my SEALs Undone books, book 3 has a lot of like on the page action, Fall Away, and then Fall Deep, which is book 4. Book 3 and book 4 are kind of like my most actiony books that had to like actually like kind of like Amy said about, she wrote a scene and then her editor was like, "Oh, too gruesome." There were a couple of scenes that I ended up cutting from those 2 books because I was like, is this verging just right into action adventure? I'm not sure.
Awesome. How about Amy?
I have 2, and one is teaming her Navy doc because they were naval doctors. One was actually one of the doctors was on a SEAL team, and the start of the book, he was on a covert operation and got injured, and the heroine was on a medical ship and didn't know who this guy was because it's all secret. She ends up chopping off his leg. I have a thing about legs. I keep saying this, and everywhere I go, I talk about it. She takes his leg off, and then 5 years later, she's assigned to a naval base, and he's her, commanding officer, and she's like, "Oh my god!" And he pretends he doesn't know that she took off his leg, but he does. So I think that was like the weirdest thing, like having the heroine like chop off a guy's leg that she ends up, falling in love with. And currently now in my book that I'm revising, which I will tell you, my editor said it was too much. I had they're in Jasper in the mountains and they're mountain rescues, and it's the summer, so there's a lot of backcountry camping and hiking in Jasper. And I had a bear attack, and it actually grossed me out even looking up injuries about a bear attack. And then I tried to dumb it down, and she's like, "Yeah, you need to add a couple more medical scenes in your book because all you have right now is that poor guy with the bear." And I'm like, "I'm really sorry." So right now, that's the weirdest for sure.
Okay, before we go to Desiree, we have to know what the cat's name is, Zoe.
This is Olivia, and she's the cutest. She's like really little. She was the runt of the litter, and she is my baby.
Oh, hi, Olivia. Okay, Desiree, tell us about some of your crazy scenes.
Well, when I was writing really, really erotic, I had a scene where my hero went to a club in Chicago where he met a woman that was what he considered the ultimate sub. And they had this really wild night, and then he doesn't see her again for 5 years. And then when they meet up again 5 years later, he's in civilian life, and she turns out to be his boss. And they had a real hard time adjusting to the complexity of the situation. I had another scene that I actually took out of the book because my beta readers said, "Are you kidding? People are going to kill you for that." Or I had somebody falling out of a hot air balloon, and they said, "No, you can't do that. No, no, no." But I really would have liked to put it in
Awesome. Dargood wants to know who was the most controversial hero or heroine that you wrote about. Let's start with Desiree.
Oh my God, the most controversial. I don't know. I think most of my heroes are controversial. Start with Zoe and let me think about it, okay?
All right.
Okay, so I mentioned both of these books before, book 2 and then book 7. In book 2, the heroine from book 7 is like the other woman. There's a little bit of a love triangle. It's like, it's not a love triangle in that Jake is torn, but just Natasha's presence really complicates the plot line of book 2. And I knew when I wrote book 2 that later on in the series, Natasha would fall in love with Jake's brother. But like, you can see the difference in length in these two books. This is book 2 and this is book 7. And it took twice as many words to give Natasha her happy ever after ending in a way that made me happy and made readers happy. But like, before I released it, people were like, "Not that one." And I was like, "Oh yes, that one," because she deserves an HEA. And anyway, and you know what? After I released it, nobody emailed me about it again. So she was only really controversial like pre-release.
That's awesome. Great answer. How about Amy?
Yeah, so my heroes, because I go through revisions with Harlequin and they're not always right. Sometimes not always right during the first draft. I guess, well, definitely, I think Taming the Navy Doc, he got a lot of response. People were like, really, that one, my hero that got his leg taken off. They were really into that. I also wrote a hero in, sorry, I don't title my books. So Alejandro's Sexy Secret. I always say that, I always start laughing. He was a stripper and he stripped his way to get through medical school and had a one night stand. Again, ran into his boss, who was, or ran into the woman he had a one night stand with, who's his boss. So he was a stripper, and I wasn't quite sure I was going to get away with him being an exotic dancer to get his way through medical school, and I did get away with it. And right now, my current hero, who I love, he's going through some revisions. Unfortunately, he kissed her when she was concussed, and my editor's like, no, she can't be concussed when they have their first kiss. I'm like, yeah, that's true. So I'm having to work on him. He's a bit of a bad boy. He's a little bit wild. So right now, Jimmy's giving me a hard time.
All right, Desiree. Desiree, we got to unmute you. Sorry about that.
There we go. I think my most controversial hero was Rick in Aftershock, which was the second book in my rock music series. He was your typical rock band leader. He knew it all. He had it all. Don't tell him what to do. And here is Sydney, the heroine, who's doing publicity for the band, and she's not going to be pushed around by him. And it was a hard balance, and I got reactions from both sides. People who said, he's much too much of an asshole, take him out of the book altogether. And then people who said, yeah, he needs to be firm because that's the business he's in. But I still get feedback from people who read the book. I mean, it's not either or. They either love him or hate him. So, yeah, I try not to write too many heroes like that.
On that note, I want to know, are your uniform heroes always tortured? Do they always have like something from their past that's haunting them? Or do you also write, I don't know, I guess that would be like fluffier. Let's start with Amy.
There we go. I couldn't unmute myself. I kept clicking and it was like, no. No, they have to have something that's going to keep them from having their happily ever after. That's what I was taught. They have to have something in the way. It can't be easy for them. They don't always have PTSD. I've written a few of those. Um, 'Cause, there's they've been burned by love, something has stopped them, something has made them afraid to have a relationship with the heroine because if, they're too beta, then no, my editor's like, "No, he's too nice. You have to make him more broody, more he has to have something that's gonna keep him from you gotta make him work for their romance, and the heroine's the one that's gonna make him turn." So
Awesome. How about Zoe?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, years ago, I went to a conference in Seattle, the Emerald City Conference, and there was a panel about sports romance. And I promise this relates back to military romance. And there was somebody in the audience who wanted to know, like, what publishing house might be interested in the sports romance she was writing with a fencing hero, a hero who fenced. That was his sport. And the Harlequin editor on the panel talked around it like this way and that way. She was very polite about it, but finally she said, I gotta be honest. The thing about sports romance is that yes, it's about sport, but it's also an alpha hero delivery device. And I feel like that's also very true for heroes in and out of uniform, for military romance, for for a lot of like even military or medical romance or first responder romance. Really, what a reader's looking for there is not just the setting and the realism of the military experience and the military world, but also kind of an archetypal character. And you can write books that have military heroes that don't fit that archetypal mode, but then those books may not actually be like a reader might not classify it as military romance. They might classify it as a contemporary romance with a military hero. And those two things are, they're just shelved slightly differently in readers' minds. And as publishers and as authors, we need to accept how readers talk about books, because we can like wish that it was somehow different. But if that's not the reader experience in the marketplace, then we're just kind of like trying to constantly fight an uphill battle. So I write all sorts of fluffy books. I don't write them in my military romance series. Does that make sense? That I always like to have that kind of like meteor. And as Amy says, it's not always PTSD. But there's always there's always some part of that. Like I joke that in hindsight, Pine Harbor really turned into a boy, these men need therapy. It was kind of series. And the thing is that doesn't really work to pitch it, but deep down, that's actually what it is for me. And that's how I kind of wrap my head around it. And either through the relationship or through the relationship and actual therapy, they kind of finally get their head screwed on straight. And that's a good chunk of what military romance is for me.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So Desiree, same question. Are your heroes always tortured? But I want to add on to that for you because you have so many books. So how do you not torture people the same way over and over? How do you keep that torture fresh?
Two things. First of all, my books are all character driven. So my characters come to me even before the stories do. I will imagine these characters and imagine what's going on in their lives, in their heads. Everybody has some kind of problem. I don't care who it is. And you can make it as big or as small. Nobody's life is without a problem. So that affects how they interact with other people also. So as I build my characters, I have to decide, okay, is he going to be so tortured that people are going to cry reading about him? Will they cheer at the end? How is he going to work this out with other people? So that's basically what drives my stories. I have some that are less tortured than others, but I also try to strive for reality because face it, every single person in life has a problem. So I try to take a problem and make it readable and how it affects my particular character. When I was writing about all these cowboys while I lived in Texas, I was lucky I got to talk to a lot of them, and you get them going and they talk about problems like things with their ranches and things. Here's an example. My late husband and I were having brunch at a place near where we lived in Texas, and there was a big fight going on over land, a piece of land. And the ranchers didn't want the land to be used for what the owners wanted it to. And we overheard people talking at a table behind us about what was going on, and that the ranchers were putting a lot of money behind it to fight this particular land use. So I thought, So I thought, okay, that could be the basis for a story. How can I make a story out of it? Because everybody's got a problem. This one guy wants to use the land for this. This other guy says, no, I'm going to spend every penny, fighting you on it. So I eventually worked it into one of the Naked Cowboys stories. So I guess the short answer is yes, everybody in my book is always tortured. Somebody has to be the linchpin. Somebody has to be the voice of reason, the calming sense. You can't have a relationship work if both people are struggling with their emotions and can't level off. So the fun for me is figuring out which the hero or the heroine has the greatest problem and how I'm going to balance it out.
That's very interesting. We have another question from Kimmy. She wants to know what led you to start writing heroes in uniform. Let's start with Desiree.
Okay, I have a long history of uniforms in my family. I was engaged to an Air Force pilot who unfortunately was killed in a plane crash. My stepfather was in the military. My brother-in-law was in the military. I dated another guy in the military for a long time. My second husband was in both the Marines and the Navy. He was out of the Marines and going to sign up for the reserves, and somebody talked him into signing up for the Navy reserves instead. Got on the train to go to reserve camp the day the Korean War broke out. So the timing was not really great for him. But so I have a lot of military history, and I've always liked the military. When I grew up in Bangor, Maine, which is about this big, one of the strategic air bases was located at Bangor, Dow Field. So I've always had a love for the military, and I've always had an interest in it. And I just managed to meet a lot of military people as I go through life.
That's a lot. Yeah, I can see how you'd end up there. Thank you. How about you, Zoe?
So I actually didn't start out writing military romance. I started just writing small town contemporary romance. And it was through the author community that I gave somebody else the idea to write a Navy SEAL story. And they said, well, how do I do that? And I was like, well, I don't know anything about Navy SEALs particularly, but I know stuff about the military in general. So like I can help you brainstorm some ideas, and I bet we can find some other people who write Navy SEALs to talk to. And that quickly spiraled into, we planned a box set, the SEALs of Summer box set, which came out in April 2014. And that was, so the story that I wrote for that was Fall Out. That was the hardest book. I mean, I was going to say, that was the hardest book I wrote to that point. It was my fourth book. So like in hindsight, at the time, I was still a baby author, but at the time I felt like I had a handle on writing contemporary romance. And now this adding the military romance really felt like an uncomfortable stretch out of my comfort zone. But I really loved this group of authors that we had pulled together for this collection. And so two of them, Kimberly Trout and Anne Marsh, dragged me through that book. That book is not like my best work in terms of like continuity, or like there's some plot holes in it, but the two characters are really, they have excellent chemistry. Like there's some pluses and minuses to that book. And I mean, let's be honest, not all of our work is an absolute best work. And that story was so hard for me to write, but I love it because even though it was a challenge, I got through it. And then that box set, the Sales of Summer box set, hit the New York Times bestseller list and the USA Today list. It actually stayed on the USA Today list for 4 weeks, which that's never been repeated in my career. And then I thought, oh, I have all these readers, new readers who love this one Navy SEAL novella. I should probably write some more. And now 17 Navy SEAL books later, it's somehow a part of my brand. The Canadian military stuff, that's a little bit closer to my heart. And I know that sort of stuff. The Navy SEAL stuff, it's like pure fantasy, really.
That's a unique way to get in there. That's interesting. How about Amy? How'd you start your doctors? How'd you start your military?
The doctors was Grey's Anatomy. Which was funny because I didn't really like ER. Like I didn't watch ER when it was on in the 90s because I do get grossed out by blood and stuff like that. And someone at where I was working at the time got me. I was a law clerk, so I was dealing a lot with the law side, I had my brother was a correctional officer for a long time. And so there was military in my family. I have a cousin that serves in the Canadian Forces right now, and a lot of my uncles did. My mom's stepdad, my grandfather, he was during World War II. He would take the corvettes down from Lake Superior down into the St. Lawrence and out to sea. So he was part of the Naval Club. So I grew up with all that. And then when I started thinking about it, I'm like, and every Saturday we'd go to my grandfather's house and I would be forced to watch MASH. I grew up on MASH. So combining the two kind of just was natural to me. I was exposed to it from a very young age. So, and I have a really very high respect for people who serve for our country, doctors, military, all that, as I've said before. So it was easy because before I started writing for Harlequin, I wrote for Laura's Cave, and I was a bit all over the place. I was learning my craft. I was following some stuff that didn't suit my voice. So it was a long process, and I don't regret it. It got me to where I am today, but yeah, I really like what I write.
Awesome. Thank you. We have a question again from Ayanali. This one's a little longer, so hang in there with me. Is it hard not to write a character that's ultra machismo? Someone who's like a lover in every port, he won't ever settle down. Is it hard to write him as the best friend or a cynical teammate? Like how do you approach the super alpha uniform guys? Let's start with Amy.
Okay. As long as it's in their past and it's not in their current love story, yeah, you can do that because Medicals lines up pretty close with Presents, which is another line, which is the top line for Harlequin series. Those are the books that you see in the bookstores that are white with the circle and the couple, and they're usually like a billionaire or so. And those guys are like, whoo, really alpha. So as long as all of that, where he was a playboy, because I've written sort of playboys, that was in their past, as long as they're not doing it in the romance story, then yeah, they could have been that way. But that could be part of the reason why they don't want to settle down until they meet the heroine who is going to change their mind.
How about Desiree? Oops, we got to unmute Desiree. Thank you.
I have to be really careful not to write the ultra machismo with my military because there are so many people who have that vision of the military that think they are over the top that way. So I want my characters to be sympathetic also. And even if it's not the hero in the romance, even if it's a friend of his. I don't want it to be somebody that is so bent that way that people don't like him and want the hero to say, "Get out of my life." So it's a challenge, and I just keep working at it. And I'm very lucky that two of my sources to that you guys will read some of my descriptions if I have a problem, and they're not shy about giving me their opinions.
Awesome. Thank you. Zoe?
So, I mean, I think that this is a really interesting question, because there's no right or wrong answer here. I do think that for each author, there becomes a right answer for you and your voice and how commercial you want to be in terms of interacting with your audience, right? Like, so I have a book, the third book in my Seals Undone series. It's called Fall Away. And Trick is like, he's a player. The book starts with him going home with a woman, and he wakes up, and in the morning it's like a classic, I probably shouldn't have gone home with her. I mean, it felt good in the moment, but like, I just want to get out of here as fast as possible. And when he leaves her bedroom, her roommate is a woman that he's had a crush on from a distance, and they've never really interacted before, but that's their like meet cute when he's coming out of her roommate's room. I think that's a really awesome setup. That's the kind of setup that I like to read. My readers did not agree. Like, they hate how that book starts. They absolutely hate it because it's kind of out of character for like a Zoe York hero. Now, that being said, if I wrote that as Ainsley Booth, I think it would be perfectly fine. So I think that there's like it's managing your reader expectations, understanding, like, for example, Amy writes for Harlequin Medicals, and the editors have a very clear idea of what the books are and what they aren't and how to deliver that. For an indie writer, for an indie author, you need to be that you need to have a tight acquisitions editor kind of mindset in deciding what you're going to do and what you aren't going to do in a series, in a brand, under an author name. But there are absolutely authors who can write those over-the-top machismo guys, and their readers love it. And it's all about finding the right audience for the right story and making the right promise. I mean, there are lots of people who like book 3 in that series too. But that's one that I hear the most complaints about, that setup and that hero's background.
Great. Now, do you either of you or any of you have questions for each other, or maybe something interesting that you could bring up, or anything you'd like to throw into the discussion before we start to wrap up? Start with Amy.
I can't even think straight because I'm in revisions. I will say, and I made a post about this on Facebook, that I find how interesting it is writing during this pandemic. What you're putting in and what you think is sexy. Because I wrote a 4 or 5 page description of grocery shopping, and I was like, "Oh, this is wonderful. This is great." And my editor's like, "There's quite a lot of shopping in here," which usually doesn't happen. I was talking about prices. I was talking about flour, like everything. So I'm like, I find that kind of funny and interesting. I was like, these revisions, sometimes I cringe when I get them, but I was laughing so hard at my editor's comments because I'm like, oh my God. So this book probably will just really stick in my mind as the book I wrote during the pandemic. So it's kind of funny what infiltrates in your life currently when you're writing a book.
So basically, like, they passed the aisle of what they needed, and then they were like, oh no, and then they leisurely walked back, and there were no more arrows on the floor pointing them in the other direction.
Well, we talked about nutmeg for a long time. He didn't know what it was. His mom was trying to get him to buy some nutmeg, and I'm like, what the heck? So I mean, I probably won't stay in the show. Sorry. But it was just like, she was just walking down the street. People were out on patios. I just found that really funny. Going back now and thinking of like, would I have written that much about grocery shopping if we weren't in the pandemic?
That's great. How about you, Desiree? Any topics you want to ask about or talk about, or anything on your mind? Oops, let's unmute. Sorry.
No, I keep forgetting. I think you have to be careful when you're writing short, which is not something I do very well. But I'm writing for an anthology, and my story has to be 5,000 words or less. And you think you could just sit down and rip out 5,000 words, and it's done. And the first time through, both of my readers, beta readers, said the same thing. A, we don't know where she is. And B, we don't know where she's going. And C, halfway through the book, you left out the hero's name. So it's when you're condensing words, you have to be careful that you just take out the right ones. And you can't just get from A to B to C without giving the reader a chance to find out how you got there. I mean, the book that I just finished before was 400 and some pages. So to write this little short story is like a real challenge for me. But I told my editor, I said, I figure if I could do this, I can do anything. So anyway, as long as I remember to put all the facts in.
There you go. Awesome. Zoe, what's on your mind?
So it's so funny that both Desiree and Amy talked about what they're currently writing, because that is my question to them is like, tell us more, like, what are those titles? When are they coming out? But it's really funny that Amy said that the pandemic is affecting what she's writing, because that's also true for me. One of the hallmarks of my books is that there are often, like, in fact, I think always in my books, there are multiple scenes in the kitchen cooking. Like, kitchens are central to my world building, always been the case. In the book that I'm currently writing, which is called Reckless at Heart, it comes out June 2nd. I'm revising it now. One of the editorial notes I have is that there are no scenes between the hero and the heroine in the kitchen. And that is normally a scene I love to write. And right now, all I want to do is write about them meeting in a pub instead. Like, I've written that 4 times in this book. And I have to like calm blue ocean, cooking in the kitchen is not something that I like normally hate, but I'm a little bit mealed out. And so putting that on the page is a challenge. So I want to know what their stories are and when they're coming out.
How about Desiree? Not just what I want to, let's add on to that, because my final question was going to be that. Plus, let me know what your latest release was that people can get now. And then let me know what's coming out next for you that they should look for. Start with Desiree. And unmute. Thank you.
Old age, okay? I get excused. It's old age. My latest release is 0 Hour. It's in my series called Heroes Rising, which is about SEALs who are out of the service and trying to relocate themselves in society. And it has to do with a militia group that wants to steal a Minuteman missile from Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana. And I got really lucky with this because my cop was in the Air Force and he was stationed at Malmstrom, and he was on one of the teams that was a security team for the missiles. So it was really great, and I had a lot of fun writing the book, and he helped me a lot in that. I am working on another Phoenix Agency story, and I just started the first book in a new series called Galaxy, which is about 4 SEALs, friends who get out of the service together, win a Powerball lottery where they win billions of dollars and start a covert ops agency. But their office is in an airplane, and if you want to meet with them, you have to call up and reserve a flight to nowhere, and they do everything on the plane. I have later this year, I have 2 more Heroes Rising stories coming, and 2 more in my Protecting series, and a full length in Phoenix, and a new book in the Omega team.
Busy, but I'm looking forward to it. How about you, Amy?
I have to think of it. I have to find, they just listed the title of the book that I have been talking about, but it's so long I can't remember it. So I'm just pulling it up. But actually, I have my 25th Harlequin Medicals coming out May 1st. Baby Bombshell for the Dr. Prince. It's set in Canada, in Yellowknife. I just recently had out a Phoenix Agency book Oh my gosh, I'm having a brain fart. Is Arctic, it's one of the Arctic ones. I'm sorry, I can't think of it off the top of my head. It's got something to do with fire. It's not blaze or burn. It might be, it's some, oh my gosh, I'm terrible.
Flames.
Yes, that's it. Thank you. Because I have another one coming out that, or I want to write, that's Arctic Embers and ends that series. I had that stuck in my head because I could see the darn cover. And the book that I'm currently revising, is called a reunion, a wedding, and a family. I don't title so it's a really long title. And that's gonna come out in November. Yeah.
Awesome. Zoe.
So my last fiction was Pine Harbor 8, which ended the first Pine Harbor series. It's called Love on the Edge of Reason. That came out in October, which feels like 10 years ago now. But actually, my most recent release is a nonfiction book called Romance Your Brand. And I want to mention it because this is being like live streamed to YouTube. And I also, in this pandemic age, I've been making YouTube videos on like youtube.com//Zoe York Writes, same handle as I am everywhere else on Instagram. And I'm even Zoe York Writes on TikTok now because apparently I just really like connecting with people in this time of being isolated. And so I made an announcement last week on YouTube that if I get to 500 subscribers, I'll make my next video wearing a unicorn onesie. So my next fiction book is Reckless at Heart. It comes out June 2nd. But right now I'm like a lot of things about Romance Your Brand.
Awesome. Well, that brings us to a close for this panel. Thank you three so much for showing up and talking to us today. I hope the readers enjoyed it and got some time to just chill out with us. I hope they pick up your books. I know I love all three of your books. If anybody wants to watch the next panel, it's at 3 p.m. and it's about apocalyptic and dystopian fiction. So quite a topic. You can, if you subscribe to the RTC YouTube channel and subscribe to notifications, you'll get the notification for when the next live goes. Otherwise, I post it on all the social media. So hopefully you'll tune in. And again, thank you three so much. Hope you have a great day. Bye.
Bye.